My name is Amelia. I'm 39 years old, living in a charming little village in England, where life is supposed to be quiet and predictable. But beneath my seemingly perfect existence lies a secret so forbidden it threatens to unravel everything I hold dear. My story begins 3 years ago when I married Peter, a kind, hardworking man who swept me off my feet. He brought stability into my life, something I craved after years of uncertainty. But he also brought something else, his son, Nathan. Nathan was 21 at the time, tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp features and a mischievous glint in his dark blue eyes. His dark hair always seemed slightly tousled, giving him an effortless charm. He was polite but reserved, a university student who visited only occasionally, spending most of his time with friends in London. When he came home during the holidays, our interactions were brief and cordial. At first, I thought little of him beyond the usual stepmother-stepchild dynamics. But slowly, things began to change. It was during Nathan's third summer back home when the air between us shifted. Peter had been working overtime, and the long evenings left me alone with Nathan more often than I expected. The first time I noticed his gaze linger was when I returned from the garden, my sundress damp with sweat and clinging to my body. His eyes followed me, an intensity in them that sent a shiver down my spine. His gaze felt like a physical touch, and though I dismissed it, blaming my overactive imagination, the feeling lingered. But the subtle tension grew harder to ignore. It was in the way his fingers brushed mine when passing a plate during dinner, lingering just a heartbeat longer than necessary. It was in the softness of his voice when he asked about my day, as if he genuinely cared, and the way he always seemed to position himself near me, whether in the kitchen or the garden. One evening, while Peter was away on a business trip, Nathan joined me in the kitchen as I cooked. The small space seemed to shrink with his presence, his cologne mingling with the aroma of roasted vegetables and herbs. "You're good at this," he said, his voice low and warm, his body leaning casually against the counter, watching me. "At what?" I asked, smiling as I stirred the pot, my cheeks flushing under his steady gaze. "Making this house feel like a home," he replied, his eyes locking onto mine with a sincerity that made my breath catch. His gaze felt magnetic, pulling me toward an emotional edge I hadn't dared to approach before. I laughed nervously, brushing off the compliment. But the way he looked at me stayed with me long after he left the room, like a melody that wouldn't stop playing in my mind. Over the weeks, our interactions became more charged. One particularly warm evening, after a small gathering at our home, Nathan and I stayed up late, cleaning the kitchen. The scent of wine lingered in the air, mingling with the warmth of the room. The wine we'd shared earlier had loosened my nerves, and I noticed his hand brushing against mine as we reached for the same dish, his fingers lingering a little too long. "Amelia," he said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion, breaking the quiet tension. I froze, the air around us heavy with anticipation. "Nathan," I began, but the words caught in my throat as he stepped closer, his movements deliberate, his eyes searching mine. "I know it's wrong," he whispered, his face inches from mine. "But I can't stop thinking about you." His confession hit me like a wave, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room felt unbearably hot, and every rational thought fled my mind. His hand reached for mine, his touch gentle but firm, grounding me in that electrifying moment. Before I could respond, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss so soft, so tender, yet so charged with emotion that it made my knees weak. I felt the warmth of his breath, the faint taste of wine on his lips, and the world around us seemed to blur into nothingness. What began that night spiraled into a whirlwind of passion and secrecy. We stole moments whenever we could, in the garden at dusk, where the fading sunlight painted his features in golden hues, in the study late at night, where the glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows across our entwined forms, and once, scandalously, in the backseat of Peter's car while he was away. Nathan was attentive in a way Peter hadn't been for years. His touch was firm yet tender, his kisses a blend of urgency and reverence. He made me feel seen, desired, alive. But with the exhilaration came guilt. Every time Peter kissed me goodbye or thanked me for a lovely dinner, a knot of shame tightened in my stomach. I'd tell myself I had to end things with Nathan, that it wasn't fair to anyone involved. But then he'd look at me with those intense eyes, filled with longing and unspoken promises, and all my resolve would crumble. One evening, while Peter worked late, Nathan and I found ourselves alone in the house. A storm raged outside, the wind howling through the trees, and the flickering light from the fireplace painted the room in shades of amber and shadow. Nathan sat beside me on the couch, his hand resting lightly on my thigh. The heat from his touch seeped through the fabric, setting my skin alight. "Amelia," he murmured, his voice low and urgent, his eyes searching mine. "I can't keep pretending this doesn't mean anything. I love you." His words shattered the fragile boundaries we'd tried to maintain. Tears welled in my eyes as I turned to face him, my heart aching with a mixture of desire and despair. "I love you too," I whispered, my voice trembling as he pulled me into his arms, his embrace both a refuge and a revelation. The sound of the storm outside was drowned out by the pounding of my heart as his lips met mine, igniting a fire that consumed us both. Our secret couldn't stay hidden forever. One evening, Peter returned home unexpectedly and found Nathan and me in an unguarded moment. The look of betrayal on his face was like a dagger to my heart. His briefcase slipped from his hand, the sound echoing in the heavy silence of the room. He didn't say a word, just turned and walked away, leaving us in stunned silence. The aftermath was devastating. Peter filed for divorce, cutting all ties with both Nathan and me. Nathan and I tried to make a life together, but the guilt and the judgment from others became too much to bear. Whispers followed us wherever we went, and the weight of our actions hung over us like a storm cloud. We eventually parted ways, unable to overcome the shadow of what we'd done. Now, I live alone, haunted by the choices I made. The house is quiet, the walls echoing with memories of a life I destroyed. I often think about Nathan and wonder if he's found happiness. I think about Peter, too, and the pain I caused him. I've learned the hard way that passion can be as destructive as it is beautiful. My story isn't one of redemption, but of caution. Love can make you blind, but it's the consequences that will stay with you forever.